You're at dinner with coupled friends. Someone makes a joke about your dating life. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, but there's a tightness in your chest that wasn't there a second ago. You've heard the questions 1,000 times. When are you going to find someone? Have you tried the apps? Maybe you're too picky. The words land differently now. They feel like diagnoses of a problem you're not sure you have. Here's what nobody tells you. Your brain might be wired differently. Not broken, not damaged, different. And that difference has been in the human gene pool for hundreds of thousands of years for a very specific reason. The discomfort you feel isn't about being alone. It's about being told your operating system is faulty when it's actually running a different program, one that served a critical function when your ancestors were navigating an uncertain world. One that still serves you now, but only if you stop trying to rewrite the code. Your brain has two competing systems. Think of them as rival governments inside your skull, each lobbying for control of your behavior. The first is the attachment system. It lives primarily in your limbic brain, centered around structures like the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens. When this system activates, it floods you with oxytocin and vasopressin. These neurochemicals make physical closeness feel rewarding. They turn a specific person into a source of safety. Evolution built this system to keep pairs together long enough to raise helpless human infants who need years of protection. The second is the autonomy system. It's distributed across your prefrontal cortex and involves dopaminergic pathways that reward novelty, exploration, and self-directed action. This system treats independence as inherently valuable. It gives you a neurochemical reward for solving problems alone, for maintaining optionality, for not merging your decision-making with another person's needs. Here's the critical part. These systems have different baseline settings in different people. Research by neuroscientist Helen Fisher identified genetic variations in dopamine and serotonin receptor genes that predict relationship patterns. People with certain variants of the DRD4 gene, which affects dopamine signaling, show significantly lower desire for traditional pair bonding. Their ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, responds more strongly to novel experiences than to relationship security. A study published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience scanned people's brains while they viewed images of romantic partners versus images of exciting solo activities. The chronically single participants showed heightened activation in the ventral tegmental area when viewing solo activities. Their brains were literally lighting up more for independence than for intimacy. This isn't a malfunction, it's a feature. Your prefrontal cortex constantly runs cost-benefit calculations. In partnered individuals, this calculation weighs companionship against freedom and typically finds companionship worth the trade. But if your dopamine system is calibrated differently, the math changes. The cost of merged schedules, negotiated decisions, and emotional labor registers as neurologically expensive. The benefit of companionship doesn't trigger the same reward response. There's also the oxytocin factor. Oxytocin is supposed to be the bonding chemical, but not everyone's receptors respond to it equally. Genetic variations in the oxytocin receptor gene, OXTR, affect how powerfully this chemical influences behavior. Some people experience a massive neurochemical reward from physical affection and closeness. Others experience a mild, pleasant feeling. When your oxytocin response is muted, the primary biological incentive for pair bonding is turned down. Psychologist Geneviève Beaulieu-Pelletier conducted research on attachment and autonomy motivation. She found that people high in autonomy motivation don't just prefer independence. They experience psychological distress when their autonomy is threatened. Their nervous systems treat loss of independence as a genuine danger. When they imagine merging their life with someone else's, their anterior cingulate cortex, which processes conflict and error detection, shows increased activation. It feels like a loss of self because, neurologically, it registers as one. The machinery in your head isn't malfunctioning when it resists partnership. It's protecting something it values more than connection, the integrity of your individual operating system. Your brain has decided, based on its wiring, that autonomy is more valuable than attachment. And it will fight to maintain that state. If you've ever felt guilty for not wanting what everyone else wants, drop a thumbs up emoji below. You're not alone in this. 10,000 years ago, your tribe needed two kinds of people. The first kind stayed close to camp. They formed tight pair bonds. They raised children together. They built permanent structures and maintained relationships that lasted decades. These were the nesters. Their brains rewarded stability and predictability. They felt safest when surrounded by familiar faces and routines. The second kind wandered. They explored new territories. They traded with distant groups. They returned with information about water sources, animal migrations, and potential threats. These were the scouts. Their brains rewarded novelty and independence. They felt trapped by too much closeness. Both types were essential for survival. Evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson describes this as behavioral diversity within groups. A tribe composed entirely of nesters would starve when resources shifted. A tribe of only wanderers would lack the stable cooperation needed to defend territory and raise young. Natural selection maintained both strategies because groups with both types outcompeted groups with only one. This maps directly onto what biologists call K-selection theory. K-selected strategies favor fewer offspring with heavy parental investment and stable pair bonds. Whereas selected strategies favor flexibility, opportunistic mating, and spreading genetic material without long-term commitment. Humans display both strategies because different environments rewarded different approaches. Anthropologist Helen Fisher found evidence of this split in her cross-cultural research. Across every society studied, roughly 15 to 20% of adults remain consistently single or serially monogamous with long gaps between relationships. This percentage holds constant across vastly different cultures, suggesting a biological baseline rather than a cultural accident. The wanderer brain served specific functions. Shamans, artists, and innovators in traditional societies were often unpartnered. They occupied a social role that required psychological distance from the group's consensus reality. Their outsider status wasn't a bug. It was what allowed them to see patterns others missed, to question assumptions, to bring back ideas from the edges of known territory. Genetic research supports this. The DRD47R allele, associated with novelty-seeking and lower pair bonding tendency, shows up more frequently in populations with histories of migration. It's been called the wanderlust gene. Groups that moved long distances to colonize new environments carried this gene at higher rates. The people who felt restless staying in one place with one partner were the ones who pushed humanity into new territories. But here's the mismatch. Modern society is built entirely for nesters. Tax systems favor married couples. Social events assume +1s. Career advancement often depends on the appearance of stable domesticity. Housing costs are structured around dual incomes. The entire infrastructure presumes pair bonding as the default healthy state. Your wanderer brain is trying to operate in a nester world. The psychological distress you feel isn't coming from being single. It's coming from a society that treats your natural operating mode as a temporary condition to be fixed. Every time someone asks when you're settling down, they're essentially asking when you'll stop being defective. The evolutionary purpose of your wiring hasn't disappeared. Creativity still requires psychological distance. Innovation still comes from people on the edges. Strong community bonds still need individuals who can move between groups without primary loyalty to a single pair. But we've forgotten why we needed wanderers. We've pathologized the very trait that once expanded human possibility. Your ancestors who stayed single weren't broken. They were the ones who found new hunting grounds, who brought back stories from distant tribes, who asked questions no one else thought to ask because they weren't embedded in the group consensus. That same neural architecture lives in you. It's not a failure to pair bond. It's a different evolutionary strategy that we desperately needed then and still need now. Bella DePaulo spent 2 decades studying a population science had ignored. She's a social psychologist at the University of California, and her research focuses on people who are single at heart, not people between relationships, not people who can't find partners, people for whom singlehood is the optimal state. Her findings dismantle the narrative you've been fed your entire life. DePaulo analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey, which tracked how over 400,000 people spent their days. Single people maintained larger friendship networks. They were more likely to help, encourage, and socialize with neighbors. They provided more care to aging parents. They didn't retreat into isolation. They built wider, more diverse social ecosystems than their married counterparts. The stereotype is backwards. Marriage narrows social worlds. It creates an insular unit that draws energy inward. Single people distribute their connection across more relationships, creating resilience through diversity rather than depth through exclusivity. Then there's the happiness question. You've heard it framed as settled science. Married people are happier. But psychologist Paul Dolan examined the data more carefully. He found that when you control for confounding variables, the happiness gap disappears or reverses. Married people report higher happiness when their spouse is in the room during surveys. When surveyed alone, the difference vanishes. Single women in particular show equal or higher life satisfaction than married women when you measure accurately. A longitudinal study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology tracked people over 18 years. Researchers found that people who stayed single didn't become less happy over time. Their life satisfaction remained stable. Meanwhile, the happiness boost from marriage faded within 2 years for most people, returning to baseline. The brain adapts. Novelty wears off. You're left with the relationship's actual fit with your nervous system, and for some people, that fit is poor. Psychologist Eliakim Kislev analyzed data from the European Social Survey covering over 20 countries. His research showed that single people who embraced their status and built strong social networks reported well-being equal to married people. The suffering came not from singlehood itself, but from stigma and poor social infrastructure for single living. Give people community support and cultural permission to be single, and the supposed happiness deficit evaporates. Now look at creativity and productivity. Behavioral scientist Eliakim Kislev also examined professional output across fields. Single people, particularly those who remain single long-term, produced more creative work. They published more papers. They filed more patents. They started more businesses. The correlation held even when controlling for work hours. Something about the unpartnered brain generated more novel output. Researchers at the London School of Economics studied time allocation patterns. Single people spent significantly more hours per week on skill development, creative projects, and community involvement. The time partnered people invested in relationship maintenance went elsewhere for singles. Into mastery. Into creative risk-taking. Into projects with uncertain payoffs that required years of solo focus. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson's work on well-being offers a clue why. He identified different types of happiness. Hedonic happiness comes from pleasure and comfort. Eudaimonic happiness comes from meaning and growth. Partnership excels at providing hedonic happiness through companionship and physical pleasure. But eudaimonic happiness often requires solitude, autonomy, and the freedom to pursue goals without negotiation. Single people report equal overall happiness because they're optimizing for a different kind of well-being. There's also data on resilience. A study in the Journal of Family Psychology examined how people handled major life stressors. Single people who had chosen their status showed psychological flexibility equal to or greater than married people. They'd learned to solve problems independently. They'd built diverse support systems. When crisis hit, they had more varied coping strategies because they couldn't default to a partner as the primary solution. The evidence isn't saying partnership is bad. It's saying partnership is optional. Your brain can build a satisfying life through either strategy, but only one of those strategies gets treated as legitimate. Only one gets institutional support. Only one escapes constant questioning. The suffering single people report isn't because their brains lack something marriage would provide. It's because they're constantly told they're incomplete while simultaneously demonstrating equal well-being, stronger communities, and often greater creative output. Comment a light bulb emoji if this data contradicts what you've always been told about single people. Here's what nobody mentions when they pity your single status. You've built something most partnered people have lost. Psychologist Natalie Pennington studied friendship quality across relationship statuses. She found that long-term single people maintained an average of 8 close friendships compared to 3 for married people. But the difference wasn't just numerical. The depth of those friendships was greater. Single people confided more. They supported friends through crises more consistently. They showed up. Partnership creates a psychological moat. It gives you one person for everything. Emotional support, physical intimacy, logistical partnership, intellectual stimulation, social companionship. It's efficient. It's also fragile. When that one relationship falters, the entire support structure collapses. You've built a distributed system. Different friends meet different needs. You've learned to ask for help from multiple sources. You've developed the social skills to maintain reciprocal relationships without the crutch of romantic obligation. This isn't loneliness. It's resilience through redundancy. Then there's psychological flexibility. Researcher Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion found that single people who embraced their status scored higher on measures of self-reliance and emotional regulation. They'd learned to comfort themselves, to make decisions without external validation, to sit with uncertainty without a partner to buffer anxiety. Partnership can become a psychological crutch. Your nervous system learns to outsource regulation. You use another person's presence to calm your amygdala. You rely on their judgment to validate your decisions. Your brain stops developing certain capacities because it doesn't need them. You have a permanent anxiety buffer. Single people don't have that option. They develop what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediate relief. This translates into every domain. Career risks become more manageable when you're practiced at sitting with fear alone. Creative projects requiring years of uncertainty become possible when you're not seeking constant reassurance. There's also the difference between chosen and circumstantial singlehood. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger studied social rejection using fMRI. When people who wanted partnership but couldn't find it were shown images of couples, their dorsal anterior cingulate cortex lit up. This is the same region that processes physical pain. Their brains experienced romantic exclusion as genuine suffering. But people who chose singlehood showed different activation patterns. Their ventromedial prefrontal cortex, involved in self-directed choice and meaning-making, showed increased activity. Their brains processed their status as an intentional preference, not a deficit. The neurological experience was completely different. This distinction matters enormously. The suffering attributed to singlehood often comes from wanting partnership and feeling rejected. It's not the absence of a partner that hurts. It's the chronic sense of unwanted exclusion. People who've consciously chosen singlehood don't show this pattern. Their brains aren't registering loss. Here's the plot twist within the plot twist. Even circumstantially, single people can shift their neurology by reframing their narrative. Psychologist Dan McAdams studies life stories and identity. He found that people who reframe challenging circumstances as chosen or meaningful show improved well-being regardless of external conditions. Your brain cares deeply about the story you tell about your life. If your story is "I'm single because no one wants me," your nervous system lives in chronic rejection. If your story becomes "I'm single because partnership hasn't met my threshold for worthwhile trade-offs," the neurology changes. You've shifted from victim to agent, from defective to selective. The stigma creates the suffering, not the state itself. Sociologist Eliakim Kislev found that in countries with less stigma around singlehood, the well-being gap between single and partnered people disappeared entirely. In cultures where single adults are fully integrated into social life, where housing and events aren't structured around couples, single people thrive equally. Your psychological pain isn't evidence that you need a partner. It's evidence that you're being pathologized for a legitimate life structure. The problem isn't your relationship status. It's a society that hasn't built infrastructure for the 15 to 20% of humans whose brains are wired for autonomy over attachment. And finally, there's this. You have time. Partnered people spend an average of 11 hours per week on relationship maintenance according to time use studies. You redirect that energy elsewhere. Into skills, into friendships, into creative work, into becoming more interesting, more capable, more psychologically developed. You're not missing out on growth by staying single. You're often accessing different growth that partnership makes harder. The question isn't whether you're developing. It's whether the development you're experiencing has value, even though it doesn't fit the conventional narrative. You need clarity before you need strategy. Most people who stay single can't answer one question cleanly. Are you choosing this or avoiding something? Start with the relationship audit. Take 20 minutes alone with a notebook. Write down every reason you're currently single. Not the reasons you tell other people, the real ones. Then beside each reason, mark it with either C for choice or F for fear. Take 20 minutes alone with a notebook. Write down every reason you're currently single. Not the reasons you tell other people, the real ones. Then beside each reason, mark it with either C for choice or F for fear. Choice sounds like, I value my schedule autonomy. I prefer diverse friendships over one deep partnership. I haven't met someone whose company I prefer to solitude. Fear sounds like, I'll lose myself. I'll get trapped. I'll disappoint them. I'm not worthy of being chosen. Both lists are valid, but they require different interventions. Choice needs protection and infrastructure. Fear needs examination and resolution. Most people have a mix. The key is knowing which you're dealing with in any given moment. If your list skews heavily toward fear, you're not wired for singlehood. You're wounded and avoiding intimacy. That's a therapeutic issue, not a lifestyle preference. Find a psychologist trained in attachment theory. Work on the fear, then reassess. If your list is predominantly choice with some fear mixed in, you're in the common middle ground. You genuinely prefer autonomy, but you've also got legitimate concerns about partnership. This is workable. Address the fears so they don't masquerade as preferences. Then honor the actual preferences without guilt. If your list is almost entirely choice, you're single at heart. Your work isn't fixing yourself. It's building infrastructure for a minority operating system in a coupled world. Now build your chosen family architecture. Partnership gives people automatic structure. One person for emotional support, household decisions, financial planning, social companionship, physical intimacy. You need to build that structure intentionally across multiple people. Identify your core circle. These are 3 to 5 people who know you deeply and show up consistently. Not dozens of casual friends. A small group you invest in heavily. Schedule regular time with them. Weekly dinners, monthly trips. Whatever rhythm keeps the connection strong. Then map your support network by function. Who do you call for career advice? Who do you call when you're scared? Who do you call when you want intellectual stimulation? Who do you call for adventure? If multiple functions land on one person, that's fine. But if one person holds everything, you're building the fragility you're trying to avoid. Create rituals that replace partnership rituals. Couples have date nights and Sunday mornings in bed. You need equivalent anchors. Thursday evening phone calls with your best friend. Saturday morning hikes with your chosen family. Annual trips with the same group. Your brain craves rhythm and predictability. Give it that through friendship rather than romance. Now the dopamine reset for evaluating partnership, clearly. Your brain might be saying no to relationships because it's protecting you from a real mismatch. Or it might be saying no because it's overstimulated and partnership feels boring by comparison. Do a 30-day dopamine fast from high-stimulation activities. Reduce social media, streaming, constant novelty. Let your baseline resettle. Then honestly assess. Does the idea of partnership still feel restrictive? Or does it start to feel appealing when your brain isn't constantly chasing novelty? If partnership still feels like a cage after the reset, trust that signal. Your brain is telling you something real about your wiring. If partnership starts to sound interesting, your autonomy preference might have been amplified by overstimulation. Neither answer is wrong, but you need to know which one is true. Finally, silence the social pressure circuit. Your anterior cingulate cortex processes social evaluation and threat. Every time someone questions your singlehood, this region activates. Over time, it creates a chronic stress response around your relationship status. Practice this reframe. Other people's confusion about your choices is information about them, not about you. Their brain is wired for attachment. Yours is wired for autonomy. They literally cannot understand your experience any more than you can truly understand why they need partnership to feel whole. When someone asks when you're settling down, try this response. I'm really happy with my life as it is. I know that's different from what works for you, and that's okay. No justification, no defense. Just a clear statement of your reality and permission for difference. Build one concrete practice. Every week, write down 3 moments you experienced that partnership would have made worse. Maybe it's the spontaneous trip you took, the project you worked on until 3 in the morning, the Sunday you spent entirely alone recharging. Train your brain to notice what you're gaining, not just what you're supposedly missing. Your brain will protect what you pay attention to. If you constantly focus on what coupled people have, your nervous system registers deficit. If you focus on what your autonomy provides, it registers abundance. You're not broken. You're not incomplete. You're not in a waiting room for your real life to start. You're living a valid human experience that a significant minority of people are neurologically designed for. The work isn't fixing yourself. It's building a life so undeniably good that the questions from others become irrelevant.